Sea level rise due to climate change has been on the agenda for a long time now. And if climate change is as much of a threat as scientists or people like me are saying, then why do we still have dry feet? Sea level has changed drastically several times during human history. It wasn't until near the end of the last ice age that sea levels began to rise towards levels that we'd be familiar with today. The world prior to this, which our distant ancestors inhabited, looked very different. For example, for tens of thousands of years, Great Britain wasn't an island. Sea levels were so low, about 100 to 150 metres below current levels, that an area known as Doggerland in the modern-day North Sea connected Britain with the rest of Europe. And it was only about 8,500 years ago that this area became flooded as the climate warmed and sea levels rose. For at least the last 3,000 years, sea levels have been fairly constant. This has allowed for coastal settlements around the world to grow and flourish over time. But more recently, as a result of human activity, the tides are on the move again. Since we got into the habit of burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil and gas for energy, the total amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has increased by about 50%, from roughly 280 parts per million in the year 1750 to around 420 parts per million today. All that extra carbon in the atmosphere acts like a greenhouse, trapping the sun's heat and warming the planet over time. This global heating is causing both the Greenland and the Antarctic ice sheets to melt and glaciers to retreat around the world, which is pushing up sea levels as the meltwater flows into the ocean. The more significant effect, however, is that as the oceans warm, they expand, magnifying the effects of ice loss. But why is it, you might say, that the sea isn't coming in through the door already? The scientific world has been talking about rising sea levels for 30 or 40 years, but as yet, not that obvious. Well, to start with, for many communities this is happening now. In Florida, for example, mean sea levels have been rising as fast as an inch every 3 years, threatening millions with increased flooding, and at least 8 low-lying Pacific islands have already disappeared. But for everybody else, at this point it's basically just a matter of time. In the short term, even the most severe projections for sea level rise don't go above about a metre by 2100. But in the long term, all of us will be facing drastic sea level rises as high as 50 metres. All the extra greenhouse gases we've released into the atmosphere over the past 250 years will be having an effect for thousands of years to come, even if we stop emitting tomorrow. Locked in sea level rise is what we're at present already committed to. Over the next few hundred years, some of the world's largest megacities will be entirely submerged, and others see more than 50% of their populations displaced due to flooding. Now, in order to prevent significant sea level rise in the future, we'd need to start removing carbon dioxide and methane from the atmosphere, where currently we're still adding it. This means going further than just reducing carbon dioxide emissions to zero. We actually need to start actively sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This could be achieved through a process called rewilding, which involves planting new forests or large areas of vegetation to act as a carbon sink. Technological means of doing this are also under development. This is known as carbon capture and storage. Whilst potentially promising in a few areas, it's by no means guaranteed to work at scale. And given the scale of the task, which amounts to effectively reversing many of the effects of industrialisation, it would also require an enormous amount of political will and sacrifice from people in order to achieve. In short, to put a stop to long-term sea level rise, we would have to make major compromises now to benefit the future, which isn't something that we have a very good track record with. And you might say, well, who cares if people in 500, 1,000 years time are living underwater? What's that got to do with me? Why should we all care? Well, some might say that it goes against the idea of progress, that we're damning future generations to experience hardship that we ourselves have never experienced, that we'd be moving backwards in terms of human development. If we do nothing, we'd be guaranteeing a darker future rather than moving forward as a species. In any case, whatever we do in the next few years will affect humanity for several thousand years to come, and it's worth remembering that every single one of us has a great deal more power to change the future than we might think.